Welcome to Landwards, the podcast for the land-based engineering community, brought to you by the Institution of Agricultural Engineers.
Today, I am joined by Philip Wright, Independent Advisor on Soils and Cultivations, who's going to talk to us a little bit about his career. Good afternoon, Philip. Thank you for joining us.
Afternoon, Andy.
So for a start, give us a bit about your background and how you became an agricultural engineer.
Well, it's not a particularly long story. This I trained at Silso when it was Silso College back in the 1970s, the late 1970s, and a couple of my key mentors were Dick Godwin and Gordon Spohr in those days. And it's nice to say that I still do keep in contact with them now and again, which is fantastic, even after all that time. And I gained a degree, honours degree in ag engineering from Silso College, as it was then called. It became the Cranfield Institute of Technology, and basically 1979 I left there. I used to get work on farms in the holidays and stuff, and I went back to my usual incumbent, and I'd done a few of the milk round type interviews, but decided that, well, I was really a little bit unsure. I'd had enough of education at that point. I think I'd had far more than enough. So I just wanted to get working. So I went back to my local farm and got there while I was looking around what to do, and this advert came up for a job not too far from where I am at Boston, up at Sleaford, a tiny little engineering company that I'd not heard of actually. They wanted a design engineer, so I'd been used to writing letters and stuff. Anyway, there was a phone number. It was in the local rag. This advert was in the local paper, so I rang them up, and who was then, I didn't realise, the boss answered the phone, and we got talking, and he said, "Oh yes, well, okay. I think we ought to, ask me a few questions. We ought to come for an interview." And I was thinking, oh well, that'll be an official bib and tucker job after a bit of time and whatever. And he said, "Well, when can you come?" And I said, "Well, whenever you like. I could come now if you want." "Right, come on then." Yeah. So 20 minutes later, to cut a long story short, he'd offered me the job. It was a residential caravan in the middle of a site in the middle of Sleaford, and the company was called Simba. There were 5 people working for them at the time, and the boss said, "Well, you can have my office in the caravan here, and I'll go and work from my home." And we bought a drawing board because there was no computers at that time, and that was where it started, really. And I became technical director of Simba after a few years. Company grew a little bit, not as a complete direct result of me, I have to say. There were some really innovative people there, and particularly the boss, Keith Burton, tremendous bloke, innovative bloke, and I basically grew with the company, really. We didn't have hardly any drawings at the time, so it was very much a question of starting from scratch. They used to go and measure the previous machine that they'd made for a cutting list to make the next one. They had a few bits and pieces written down, and so it really started from there. And 28 years later, a management buyout later, I decided I needed a bit of a change. I loved my time at Simba, but I thought, if I don't do something slightly different now, I'm going to probably regret it and be too old. So I decided I was up for a change, so decided to work for myself as an independent, and Simba were brilliant. They helped me in my early stages of my own, if you like, my own business. They helped me with work. They gave me some work, and it's a hugely long story, Andy, that'll take longer than this entire interview if I'm not careful. But
we'll look forward to the book. It can only be a matter of time.
And I suppose this bit is really relevant. But in effect, I got to a stage where my role had had taken me down a path of being a company director, roles, responsibilities. It had taken me down a path of more or less managing people and managing overall aspects of the business, rather than the thing I really loved, which was actually getting involved with the soil, with farmers, and designing machinery and working out.
Almost taken you away from the engineering.
Yeah, and whilst it's clearly that happens as the company evolves and gets bigger, I started to feel that I was really not. I was being paid to do stuff. Sometimes manage people. I mean, they were great people, but I'd never been trained to manage people. I'm rubbish at it, really, I suppose. But I felt I was underutilized. I was being paid far too much money for doing a job that I didn't really enjoy and probably wasn't brilliant at. And I could do a better job for Simba by working from home and doing some of the more specialist design work, including dynamic simulation and finite element analysis, which we were just getting into at the end. I felt I could do that, as I was doing it at home at nights and at weekends, anyway, as you do. So I thought I could do a better job at that if I'm working for myself. So that's really where it started, and we've meandered from there to where I am today, which is reasonably flexible and sort of going with whatever situation transpires at the time.
Do you want to take us maybe through a day in the life of Philip Wright, and maybe let us know how the current situation with the coronavirus is impacting some of the work you do?
Yeah, I mean, this is something for the sort of younger of the listeners, or the ones that are looking to get up into a career. This is they might find it interesting. I mean, if you're the sort of person that really likes a structure to a day, likes to know, a structure to your work life, where you're going, what you're doing, you've got a plan, you've got a series of targets and whatever else, then that's good. Working for yourself is slightly different to that. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about here. But yes, I can look at my calendar, my sort of, I have a spreadsheet with the stuff on by month, and you fill in the day according to, and it then ultimately becomes my timesheet for the business. But I can look 2 months ahead. I can look 2 months ahead at the moment, and it's quite bare actually. And a few years ago, I'd have been thinking, God, I've got to get some work in for that. That's there's not a lot there. And then all of a sudden, with that in mind, you'll get a few phone calls, and the old days just get taken up. But it's not. It can be a bit disconcerting, can that, if you're used to a more ordered day. But so from my point of view at the moment, there are two strands to my business, really, to my activities, to my life, working life, which are offering advice to farmers and to basically bodies such as AHDB, Catchment Sensitive Farming, CSF, and larger public sort of owned or private owned bodies, water authorities, and that can be quite prescriptive. It can be quite well well booked in advance work. It can be it's very useful to have it as a sort of bread and butter. There might well be large groups of farmers involved with meetings for the AHDB, for example. They might be on farm or in a more of a formal environment. At the moment, it can well be I'm sat at home as everyone else is, and we're blathering across the internet. And then it can be equally a one-to-one farmer client visit that I'm making to someone who's rung me up and has said, "Oh, I'm thinking about changing the direction of the business, or we're thinking of doing it slightly differently, or we're thinking of changing our drill, or we're changing our cropping policy, or I've got a problem. I don't know whether I've got a big drainage problem in some of these fields, or whatever. And that might be a complete one-to-one visit, which brilliantly interesting. Everyone's different. There really are, a case study for every visit you do, and that can then, within limits of client confidentiality, obviously, can feed into to when I'm doing a more formal presentation, into examples, for instances, as long as A, there's permission, or B, it's kept confidential, or whatever. So it sort of self-generates a level of knowledge and experience and information, and one feeds the other, really. And then alongside of those sort of farming, soil cultivations, mechanization driven things, I've got my design work, 3D design. I use Autodesk Inventor because we used it at Simba, and I think you get used to something, and it becomes, well, not second nature, but you certainly get comfortable with a system and a process, and so 3D design, small projects for people. I have to admit, I do try and offer a service of more specialized. So, for example, if someone's doing the design work but needs a little bit of help because they're only just learning a system, SolidWorks, or just generally computer-aided design, it can be quite useful to help them out a little bit with a, just a filing structure for the business is a classic. You get, you just to have something for your business that you've got proper parts, base part numbers, component part numbers or designations, assemblies, and then that can lead on to parts book drawings, illustrations, bills of materials, technical illustrations and stuff, but just to actually give them a bit of a hand to set up a structure for a start, because
it's the building blocks.
I've got many t-shirts of having done that wrong in the past and regretted it, and so that's quite, I find that quite enjoyable, but quite rewarding, really, if you can go somewhere and give them a bit of a structure to work to. It can be quite nice to see them save a bit of time on doing stuff. And then the sort of more specialist dynamic simulation and finite element analysis, stress analysis, if you like, to call it that. So someone who's got a 3D model of an implement or whatever it is, really, and that they can send it over, and I can simulate that dynamically, apply the loads. That's the key bit, is knowing the correct loads to apply, other than those that are applied by gravity, and that's something where I think hopefully my experience can help a little bit. And it also means that, for example, a company, rather than spend a few £1,000s and license fees on a package, and then someone training to actually understand how to operate that package, they might use me in the first instance to show them the benefits of it, the merits of it, and then they might evolve into doing it themselves later. But to have some service for a start, where you can have a little project and say, well, let's have a look at that, judge how effective it is, and then if they've got someone on board at their end that enjoys that and can grab it and run with it, then I can probably help them to evolve and use that in their own business going forward. So those are two real main aspects, and my day, Andy, might be made up of either or both of those, or it might start with one, and then I'll get a phone call from the guy saying, well, I'm sorry, you can't come now because we're in lockdown, and therefore might have to evolve and grab a bit of some of the other work and fiddle that into the day instead. So I do need a few understanding clients in that respect that will give me a project and say, well, yeah, if you can get through it in a week or 2 or 3 for me, then we'll leave it with you. And they're brilliant to be able to have that sort of work to drop back into, really.
And I think flexibility is key. Certainly, in my career, I appreciate having clients to work with who understand the draws and demands of other bits and pieces of the business.
Yes.
Just give me some light bulb moments from your career which stand out to you as times where you've either changed your view and your sort of worldview, or it's helped you to pivot in a slightly different direction with your work.
Yeah, that's interesting. The most important one I'll leave to the end. I think in the early days, very much yes. Now I have to be careful because I'm quite ancient now, so some of this won't probably make so much sense to some of the younger listeners. But the movement from a drawing board and formal drafting to computer-aided design was a key shift for me. I really enjoyed how I was taught, on a drawing board.
BS 308.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is just a completely different world. Having done it, you're never ever going to go back, are you? There's so much more you can do with the modern system. But I suppose the trickiest bit was shifting from having an office full of drawings and all the printing and all the faffing about, and shifting from that to actually putting it onto or adapting it into a computer system. And the biggest issue in the early days with that was almost having to do it all again. Yeah. Because it had already been drawn up and you felt yourself having to do it again, to put it on the computer. And yeah, it's hugely important, as you probably, I'm sure you know, the action of doing it in the first design of any particular range or model is always the longest one to do, because you've got to do everything from scratch for it. So and then once, that's the beauty of the computer type system, once that's done for a start, evolution into different ranges, into different widths and adaptions are very, very much easier. The first one is always the most time consuming. And so if you're already starting with a product range you've got and you're having to redesign, or no, you're having to re-input all of that onto a computer, there's many people within that business that keep looking at you thinking, what on earth are you doing? We've got that. But unless you've got that available, it's
frozen in time though on paper, isn't it? That's the trouble. It's frozen in time.
Yes, yeah, and so that's something that can be very frustrating. But I can say one thing with the older way of doing it is the fact that the persuasion to change something had to be far greater, because you had to get out and redo all of those drawings again. The persuasion to tweak a CAD model is almost too easy.
Yeah, it's almost sit down and do it.
Yeah, it's almost too tempting,
Document control and version control becomes critical though in that situation, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and again, it comes back to a bit of discipline there is hugely important, and not getting carried away with that. And yeah, one of the really difficult things I used to find was when we were putting the stuff onto the system, let's say, was resisting the temptation to tweak it, because you were putting it down warts and all, and in the back of your mind all the time you'd be thinking, oh, that ought to be a bit thinner, that ought to be a bit more refined, that ought to be a bit simpler. And yeah, I'm sure you know what I mean. If you weren't careful, you weren't actually designing or drafting, inputting the starting point for then progressing on from. So that was a massive that was the biggest shift, I think. I think in more recent times, even more fundamental and larger, but more interesting, hideously more interesting than that, is my understanding of the fact that soils are structured and are maintained and are best manipulated by natural means rather than metal.
Yep.
You know, I spent 28 years of my life designing machinery to rip soils to pieces, if I'm honest. And it's only been really in more recent times I've realized that metal doesn't structure soil. It doesn't really, it doesn't enhance nature completely, but it's maybe the means to an end. Roots are the things, plants, biological activity, actions, and plant roots primarily are the things that actually influence and determine and enhance and maintain structure, and metal might be the means to just making those roots get there a bit quicker. That for me is
almost a shift of priorities in terms of modifying soil.
Yeah, and working with that, I think, is the key going forward, to help nature evolve as quickly as possible to produce as hopefully a more resilient environment in our fields, in our soils. But yeah, that and that now influences really everything I do. You know, when I'm on farm, you look at soils, are they damaged? Yeah, is there a barrier to roots? Is there a barrier to water? Is there an issue here? If so, where is it, and how do we fix it? Well, basically, how do we help nature fix it is the mindset, I think, nowadays.
You know, what can nature do about that, rather than mechanical unless necessary?
Yeah, and this then becomes really interesting, I think. And if, for example, you were loosening a field or a part of a field because there's a barrier to something growing properly and efficiently, and identify where the problem is. Yep, identify that there's a barrier there. Otherwise, you know, don't go and prescriptively rip it apart if there's nothing wrong with it. This is near evangelical as I'm going to get, I think, with all of this. But having identified where the problem is, then if it's a structure problem and you're encouraging that to be fixed by roots growing through it and holding it then apart and maintaining it, it is actually possible to reduce the amount of metal when you add the roots into the equation. So rather than go to the full depth of the problem and completely reorientate all the aggregates, all the columns that are down there, it may well be possible to do slightly less, release the roots through the problem if you know exactly where it is, or you can identify the severity, the serious bit of that problem, release the roots to get through that, and then let them do the rest. So it may well be we can actually, in the end, work the soil a lot less intrusively, a lot less aggressively for certain, and a lot less of a depth, and actually achieve a result of roots plus metal synergy. 1 + 1 = 3. Definitely.
Yeah, without all that effort, as you say, enabling the nature to do its work. Can we just jump a little bit sideways, do you think? I wondered what advice you would offer to engineers who are not quite as advanced in their career as you, so to younger engineers who are keen to progress their careers. What advice would you offer?
Use the 2 things on the side of your head to listen, and the 2 things in front of your head to look. And if you do both of those, maybe before opening the piece in the front and middle of your face, you'll probably do all right. I think our industry is full of people and customers. I'm thinking now farmers. It's full of people that have spent their entire life just living and breathing the job. And if you can listen to them, you have to take a view, because you know their views might be might need tweaking a bit or modifying a bit or helping or cajoling into different directions. But I think you have to be prepared to listen to the marketplace, what they need, what they think they need, and if you then provide them with something in terms of a product or a service or whatever, yeah, listen as to how happy they are, what's good, what's bad about it. I think if you do that, and have a really open mind and when I mean listen, not hear. You've got to listen, and if you can understand the feedback and get that interaction and dialogue going, then you should be all right. You should go far. It's a fantastic industry. I think I've been really lucky to be involved with it, because every day for me when I'm at work I'm enjoying it, and that I know a lot of people, a lot of my pals who can't say that, bless them. So I'm so lucky, and I think we all are in this industry, that we should be enjoying it, because there's so much diversity, there's so much stuff interesting, there's so much to come at you. You work with nature, you're working with nature, and this is probably the second thing really. You're working with something that is going to evolve around you as you're working with it, and as a result of that, you will do things that work today or work this year. Ultimately, if you carry on doing just the same thing, it is nature that will evolve, and it will possibly respond better by doing things slightly differently going forward. Or certainly, a classic would be crop rotations, really. And maybe even this comes back to another little minor light bulb moment, Andy, that a Norfolk four-course rotation, the classic, I firmly believe a good sound rotation of cropping is the basis, along with drainage, is the basis for sound farming. But then you can rotate your cultivations to go along with that. If you do the same cultivation year in, year out, at the same depth year in, year out, it's highly likely that nature will be just nicely evolving to get used to that, and will throw something at you, and that you're better off rotating that aspect of the job as well, which is a fantastic industry, workplace to be in, really, because things change. Even if you don't want them to, they do, and I think, yes, that another slight, you have to be able to accept that things change and change with them. Don't be threatened by change. Regard if that's changed, it might be a pain in the backside, but I think you'll probably find, if you can look at it, where's the opportunity? Where we've got a problem, use the problem we've got to give us an opportunity to move forward into. And until you've actually encompassed that, you'll probably not understand what I've just said. But if you can use the difficulty, work with the difficulty. An old mentor of mine, that was his catchphrase, and tremendous catchphrase that. Yeah, how can we use the difficulty we've got to move on? And I think those are probably the main things. You'll have to work hard. You'll have to work probably harder than in some industries, other industries. But it's only because you like it and love it that you're doing it.
I think passion's everything, though, isn't it? We all have to have some reason to get out of bed in the morning, other than just the money, as it were. 'Cause it's all well and good to pay the bills, but to have some excitement, some vigour about why you're doing something is worth an awful lot. Just casting your mind back, what elements or milestones have occurred in ag engineering which you've been a part of, or things you feel proud of being part of, Philip?
Yeah, I'm not. You know me a little bit by now, don't you? I'm not really one for blowing my own trumpet. I guess.
Things you've been glad to have leant against the tyre of when it's coming off the production line. How's that sound then?
the probably by far and away, with my design hat on, that would be evolution of machines to be able to press the land, to consolidate the land by pressing rather than rolling it. What I'm meaning by that is, in the scope of 30 minutes of conversation, intermittent consolidation of the ground. So the DD ring, the Simba DD ring, something that I can remember it now. We were sat on a beach overseas having a holiday, and I was fed up. Again, you know me a little bit. I was fed up after the usual 7.5 minutes of doing nothing, and I was scribbling around on
needed some inspiration.
I don't do nothing very easily, really. I was scribbling around with a piece of, and we'd had a problem. Yeah, we were going through this big problem, and again, this, for your younger listeners, this will be over the heads, but I apologise. The older ones will probably chuckle, but at the time, the saying in the industry was, "What's the similarity between Philip Wright and Nick Leeson?" If you remember Nick Leeson, yeah, we both had problems with bearings. He was the
Yes,
he was the man in bearings bank at the time, but and yeah, I was sat chilling a bit, but thinking how to get over this interminable problem with pressing the ground with cast iron presses and knocking bearings out on them at a rate of knots. Because we were trying to go too quick, because we wanted to do an operation disc carrying that was better at speed, and you know, trying to get to a result with that was a bit of a challenge. But anyway, the upshot was, I sat there and thought, well, Righty, you've been designing disc carriers for heaven knows how long. Why don't you use a disc blade? Within about 15 minutes, we'd got a sketch on a bit of paper, which became the press ring, the DD ring, and that was something that, yeah, it took a bit of convincing my fellow directors at times. You had to really go with this, and because it was a serious amount of investment, and to get something built, they trusted me, bless them, to do that. It allowed me to, it was a huge investment in tooling to get a press tool that would crunch a DD ring out of chrome boron steel that was red hot, and quench it and do everything else at the same time, for under 35 to 40,000 pounds in those days. So I mean, it was a fair old investment.
Big money.
But we, so it needed to be reasonably near the right shape from the word go, Andy. Well, put it this way, it wasn't going to be changed.
Yeah.
So we had to try and get it. But yeah, that was a decent solution to something that was worse than toothache at the time, with these stuff that wasn't good enough. You know, it wasn't adequate enough. Cast iron technology wasn't good enough. So that was something that that was pretty good, really. That would have been, and I think in more recent times, the realization that roots plus iron equals, with a sensible amount of iron, equals probably the most optimum result for certain soil types. Loosening soils through a growing crop, like you do. I mean, it's not new, is it, sward lifting? But if it's in a cover crop or a growing commercial crop situation, then being able to do that effectively, and also understand that you don't have to do as much, and then the roots are there doing it for you.
Yeah.
That's been, still learning about that. Still really learning about that. Haven't got to the bottom of that yet.
Just to sort of wrap up, I think it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on, well, twofold. Some examples of how ag engineering has moved on in the last 40 years, and just maybe your thoughts on what the future holds, because you've had a good long time to look at this, haven't you? So, I think we value it.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting, isn't it? I hope and trust that, people fortunately have always got to be able to, always going to have to eat. So I guess there's always going to be the need to provide for that. The advent of precision technology and precision farming and stuff like that has really has been a massive change. Being able to control stuff and monitor stuff, and as long as we can interpret what we're reading and interpret it properly. But that's something that I think has taken us way down the line, that when I first started it was only just a dim and distant little glimmer. I think I've probably been lucky that I've lived through maybe the highest horsepower situation in farming that there's ever going to be, and I do believe that we can actually start to come down that curve on the other side now. Do we need such big kit? Do we need such complex, heavy kit? I don't think we do. Going forward, I think we can get away with a lot less weight, a lot less severity of action. I've alluded to that already. So that would be something that would be really interesting to see how that evolves going forward. And yeah, just the fact, Andy, that I think we both know, and for sure things will change. So we'll need to go and adapt with that. And some things will be a huge challenge, I'm sure. Environmentally, I'm sure there'll be some huge challenges. But if we can do something to help to sequester carbon in our industry and redress some of the imbalances, the only thing I would say, with a very, very limited experience that any of us have got with the amount of time we spend on this mortal coil, that I think we've got good opportunities coming to actually help to redress some of those balances. And nature's brilliant at sorting itself out, but clearly we can't say too much about that, otherwise people wouldn't take the current situation seriously enough. But nature's fantastic at sorting itself out, isn't it? We just need to help it along the line a bit.
No, I'd quite agree with that. Well, look, I feel we could probably carry on in this vein for several hours, Philip, till one or the other of us either needs a cup of tea or our dinner or to pop to the loo. So I think, maybe none of us are getting any younger. Anyway, what I was going to say, maybe we should draw it to a close there, just to say, heartfelt thank you. I have thoroughly enjoyed being part of this interview and listening to some great insights from your career and some good advice for listeners as well. So, Philip Wright, thank you very much for being interviewed today for Landwards. We really appreciate your input, and as I say, thank you, Philip Wright. We will be back again. But yes, Philip, really appreciate it. Thank you.
More than welcome.
You have been listening to Philip Wright, Independent Advisor on Soils and Cultivations, talking to Andy Newbold on the Landwards podcast. Thank you and goodbye.
For more information, visit www.iagri.org. You have been listening to Landwards, the podcast for the land-based engineering community, brought to you by the Institution of Agricultural Engineers.